Hello everyone and welcome to my channel Y&R Trends. I hope everyone is having a wonderful day. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. Victor learns Newman Enterprises is under attack. The Young and the Restless, Kane and Phyllis celebrated their palm, Victor turned down Jack's deal, and Sally's fears about Billy were verified. What happened on the Young and the Restless? The athletic club. Sally and Billy exited the Jazz Chesterfield and marveled over their solid date night. They ran into Phyllis and Kane, and Billy raised surprise to see them together because it was hard to keep track of whether they were on or out. Billy wondered what was over with Kane crashing the launch party as Lily's +1, yet looking cozy with Phyllis. Phyllis observed that it looked like Billy and Sally were out on a date, and she was sure Sally didn't mind that he was a horrible cotillion. Phyllis suggested that the couple plan another launch party because it sounded like the only thing Abbott Dispatches had done. Billy mentioned that he'd seen Phyllis and Kane brooding to one another earlier, and he wondered what they were cooking up. Sally refocused out her date with Billy was over, and she suggested they leave. Billy contemplated whether Kane intended to make another fortune, and he imagined there was another lonely, old woman nearly that Kane could take advantage of. Phyllis reposted that Kane had formerly fulfilled much further than Billy ever would, and she asked what Billy had to show for all the capital and chances his family had handed him. Billy asked if Phyllis was sure she could trust Kane after he'd constantly squinched her over. Phyllis recalled that she'd trusted Billy, and he'd prevaricated to her. Phyllis wrangled that Billy always demanded someone to dig him out of a hole, and she believed Sally would know that soon enough because he no way finished a design. Phyllis continued that the way Billy had treated her was disgusting, and she couldn't stay to stand by and watch him deteriorate. Phyllis stalked off and Kane followed her. Sally demanded to know what had happened to beget Billy to try to provoke Phyllis and Kane. Billy chalked the hassle up to old habits and rude putting a mute on the evening. Sally reported that just hours before, they talked about how she'd call him out if he developed. She prompted him to be honest about why he'd gone after Phyllis and Kane. Billy revealed that he'd heard Phyllis and Kane talking about their plans to go after Newman Enterprises. Sally theorized that Billy was worried that he hadn't been the one to beat Victor. Billy admitted he wanted Victor smoothed, but he didn't watch who did it. Sally was skeptical, but Billy claimed that he'd meant what he'd said before. He contended that if Victor went down, Jabot could bounce back. He assured Sally that he didn't have the itch to get vengeance. Indeed, though his fiber had been tested, Billy swore that what he and Sally were erecting was much better than that. And he wasn't just talking about Abbott Dispatches. At the new Newman estate, Jack pushed Victor to accept the deal to take Matt in exchange for the AI software. Victor entered a textbook communication and compactly said he'd to deal with commodity. After Victor left the room, a puzzled Jack asked Nikki what he was missing, since he couldn't imagine what was more important than dealing with Matt. Jack was taken suddenly when he realized Nikki actually didn't know. Across the room, Matt guessed that Kyle felt like he was on the outside looking in, and he suggested they make their own deal to get people to start taking Kyle seriously. Matt reasoned that both he and the Abbotts were on Victor's list of effects he abominated, and it would be Kyle's chance to stick it to Victor. Kyle asserted that he and Matt were musketeers, and trading Matt would be a pom-pom. Matt proposed that he and Jack make a deal, but Nikki raved that it wouldn't be in her house because Matt should have been burning in hell for the last 20 times. Jack advised that Matt wanted to make her angry so he could feel in control. Nikki said she wanted to put Matt in the ground herself. Matt reprimanded them for just standing around. Jack advised that nothing Matt said or did would save him, whether Jack handed him over to Victor or not. Matt noted that Jack was defensive of Nikki, and he misdoubted Victor or Diane appreciated it. Kyle suggested that Matt try soliciting for mercy rather, but Matt scoffed at the idea of groveling to them. Kyle instructed his security platoon to take Matt to the auto. Jack appealed to Adam to talk sense into Victor, but Adam refused to speak for his father. Kyle questioned whether Nikki and Adam were willing to sit back and let Victor use the AI software against Jabot. Adam argued that the Abbotts had formerly destroyed their company on their own. Kyle imagined that he and Jack had no choice but to let Matt go. Nikki was floored that they'd release Matt, knowing he'd gleefully hurt the people she loved. Jack combated that Victor was hurting the people Jack loved, and it would be on Victor's head if Matt walked free. Victor returned, and Jack indicated that Matt was with his security platoon until they made the exchange. Victor declared that Matt was Jack's, since Victor had more important issues to deal with. Victor assured Nikki it had nothing to do with Nick, and he told Jack and Kyle to show themselves out. A floored Jack gave Victor until the coming morning to complete the deal. After the Abbott men left, Victor called his platoon and instructed them not to lose sight of Matt. A short time laterally, Victoria arrived in response to a process from Victor, who blazoned that their family was under attack. Victor revealed that the AI program had turned on its host, and it was disemboweling Newman as they spoke. Jack and Kyle retreated to the Abbott manse. Jack assumed Victor's textbook communication had been about Newman Enterprises. Jack called his IT department and was relieved to hear there had been no breaches at Jabot. Jack supposed that Commodity Big had happed for Victor to allow Matt to leave the estate in one piece, but he was sure Victor would accept their offer by the morning. Jack confessed that despite what he'd claimed, he'd no way let Matt go if Victor refused to take the deal. He was hopeful Nikki would move her hubby to follow through. Billy and Sally returned home, and she requested that he make them a drink while she changed clothes. After Sally exited the room, Billy called Jack and reported that Kane and Phyllis were working together again to target Newman. Jack participated that he'd just been at the estate, and Victor had entered a communication that had rattled him. Sally overheard from the hallway as Billy wished he'd been the one to take Victor down. On the Crimson Lights yard, Phyllis crowed that she'd demolished Billy. She blustered about how people had treated her inadequately over the times, including Kane. Kane confided her for soldiering on. Phyllis placarded that she'd known one day it would pay off, and they were at the edge of greatness by taking over Newman. She supplicated him to put it in the workshop, but he advised that they were about to have a lot of adversaries. Phyllis figured that she had no musketeers, and she planned to be as generous to people as they'd been to her. Kane prognosticated that everything was about to change, and he encouraged her to be sure it was what she wanted. Phyllis demanded to know he was in, but she honored that he'd still been holding out stopgap of a conciliation with Lily and his kiddies. She observed that he sounded cool and calm, like he didn't watch at all. Kane appertained to the textbook communication he'd entered from his kiddies, and Phyllis sympathized that it had been a cutter to his heart. Kane anticipated that they'd piss off a lot of people with the move, but his family was gone. Phyllis figured that she'd no way had respect from people, so she wasn't upset about the fallout. She rambled off reasons for him to pull the detector. Kane cut Phyllis out and leaned seductively close. "It's done," he verified. Kane informed a stupefied Phyllis that he'd formerly launched the attack from his phone when they'd been at the athletic club. Phyllis complained that he'd just let her talk without telling her, and he noted that she'd been too busy tearing into Billy. Phyllis marveled that Newman was being destroyed from the inside at that moment, and she planted a passionate kiss on Kane. He protested that they were in public, and they headed for his train. Phyllis and Kane boarded the train between kisses, and she placarded it to be the stylish night ever. She credited him for making it be. As they undressed, she asked him to tell her about it over and over again because winning was foreplay. Phyllis wondered if Victor knew they'd beaten him, and Kane reported that effects were in progress. Phyllis gushed that they were impregnable, and she considered changing the company's name. Phyllis pushed Kane on the bed and declared herself the queen as she tumbled on top of him. After having coitus, Phyllis asked if Kane had felt a shift in the macrocosm because the killers had won. She wondered when they would take over the company. Kane said there was plenitude of time to get into details, but he promised she'd get her heart's desire. Phyllis conceded that he hadn't demanded to make her part of it, and she asked why he'd chosen that moment to attack rather than doing it when Victor had been taking over Arabesque. Kane explained that he'd allowed. Losing Arabesque would lead to Lily and the Haves forgiving him. He added that he'd cut Phyllis in because she'd made him see the future was out of his control, but he could decide what happened in the present and Dumas allowed. Effects through but no way dithered. He honored that Dumas was the confident part of him that always got what he wanted. Phyllis questioned whether Kane had done it for the right reasons. Kane asserted that everything was passing because Phyllis had made it make sense, and she was a genius in her own way. Phyllis blat that after all the times of people belittling and smirching her, she was eventually winning. Victor Newman had erected his conglomerate on the belief that nothing could truly surprise him presently. He'd faced hostile appropriations, family backstabbings, adversaries rising from the dead, and dishonors that would have crushed lower men. Yet as he stood in the study at the Newman estate, gaping at the data streaming across the tablet in his hand, Victor felt Commodity's strange coil tightly in his casket. Unbelief. Victoria paced the room, her heels clicking sprucely against the bottom, her eyes zipping between the defenses Victor's platoon had pulled up on the wall. It doesn't make sense, she said, her voice tight with subdued fear. The AI is segregating internal systems. It's locking out directors. It's rerouting finances through shell accounts that don't indeed live on paper. Victor lowered the tablet sluggishly. It makes perfect sense, he growled. Someone didn't just steal the program. They turned it against us. Nikki stepped closer, placing a steadying hand on Victor's arm. You can stop this, she said vocally, though her eyes betrayed her fear. You always do. Victor gripped his jaw. Not if the adversary knows my moves before I make them. Victoria stopped pacing. Also, we assume this wasn't arbitrary. Someone with access. Someone case. Victor's eyes hardened. Someone who wanted me to feel it. Across city in the muted luxury of Kane's private train, Phyllis Summers lay sprawled across crisp white wastes, hugely unashamed. She watched Kane button his shirt with deliberate calm, as if they hadn't just exploded a lemon under one of the most important families in Genoa City. Say it again, Phyllis prompted, propping herself on her elbow. Tell me Newman Enterprises is bleeding. Kane didn't smile, but there was Commodity dangerously satisfied in his eyes. Finances firmed. Directors locked out. Victor's scrabbling. Phyllis laughed, a low triumphant sound. I can virtually hear his roar from then. Kane turned to face her completely. This is bigger than vengeance, Phyllis. Once this finishes running its course, Newman won't just be wounded. It'll be dependent. Phyllis rose from the bed and wrapped the mask around herself. Dependent on who? Kane stepped closer. On us. Phyllis's smile widened. All those times they looked down on me. Used me. Tossed me away. She lifted her chin. Now they're going to supplicate. Kane studied her precisely. Power changes effects. Phyllis met his aspect. Without recoiling. Good. I'm tired of being the bone. Who gets changed? At the Abbott manse, Jack poured himself a drink he didn't intend to finish. Kyle stood near the fireplace, arms crossed, restless. This doesn't sit right, Kyle said. Victor doesn't walk down from influence unless Commodity spooked him. Jack jounced grimly. Newman Enterprises. Kyle exhaled. So Phyllis was telling the verity. Jack strengthened. Phyllis doesn't tell the verity. She weaponizes it. Kyle frowned. However, Jabot could recover. If Newman falls, perhaps indeed dominate. Jack's voice was quiet but firm. At what cost? Kyle turned to him. You suppose this gets bloody? I suppose, Jack replied, that when Victor Newman is cornered, everyone in the room gets hurt, including the people holding the cutter. Billy Abbott sat alone in the darkened living room, replaying every word he'd eavesdropped, every instinct he'd ignored. Sally surfaced from the bedroom, her expression undecipherable. You heard, she said. Billy jounced. Yeah. Sally folded her arms. So now what? Billy rubbed his face. Now I decide whether I'm the Joe who builds Commodity real or the Joe who can't repel watching Victor burn. Sally stepped closer. And which one are you? Billy looked at her, authentically uncertain. I don't know yet. Her disappointment was subtle but unmistakable. At Newman Enterprises, chaos reigned. Directors argued. Phones chimed unanswered. Security systems flitted. Victor paraded through it all like a general walking a battleground, his presence alone forcing silence. Find the source, he barked. I want every line of law traced. His tech lead swallowed hard. Sir, the program is rewriting itself. Victor's eyes narrowed. Insolvable. It was designed to acclimatize, the man replied. Someone anticipated countermeasures. Victor turned down, fury stewing. Kane Ashby. Victoria's head snapped up. You suppose this is him? Victor jounced sluggishly. And he didn't act alone. Back at Crimson Lights, Lily Winters goggled at her phone, rereading Kane's last communication. She'd felt it the moment he transferred it, the futurity, the distance. Devin slid into the president across from her. You okay? He asked. Lily shook her head. No. I suppose Kane just burned the last ground he had. Devin lowered. With you. With everyone. Phyllis stood before the glass latterly that night, smoothing her hair, esteeming the woman gaping back. Strong. Victorious. Untouchable. Or so she believed. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. Victor knows. Phyllis's smile faltered, for just a alternate. Also she compartmented back. Phyllis good. She turned off the light, ignorant that the war she allowed. She'd won was only just beginning and that in Genoa City, Palm's no way came without a price. The moment Phyllis Summers eventually drifted into sleep, she pictured of silence. Not peace silence. No whispers behind her reverse. No judgment in the eyes of people who claimed they knew her. No horse laugh she wasn't invited to join. In her dream Genoa City bowed. And for formerly she didn't have to fight to stay standing. But dawn came too snappily. Her phone bucketed again on the nightstand of Kane's private rail auto, the screen lighting up the dark. Phyllis stirred, vexation glaring until she registered the name. Kane. She smiled before answering. What? She muttered, voice warm with Palm. Kane's tone was different this time, downward, controlled, sharp at the edges. You need to wake up. Phyllis sat up. I'm awake. No, Kane replied. You need to be alert. That single word pierced the haze. What happened? Kane didn't answer incontinently. The faint hum of the train underlined the silence between them. Eventually he said, Victor Newman didn't just notice. Phyllis's smile faded. Define notice. He mustered. At Newman Enterprises, Victor Newman stood at the center of a war room that had been assembled in lower than an hour. Defenses covered every wall. Directors who generally commanded entire divisions sat in tense silence, staying for orders. Victoria watched her father nearly. She'd seen him angry before, furious indeed, but this was different. This was focused stone by personality. They wanted to embarrass us, Victor said calmly. They wanted us scrabbling. He looked directly at the lead cybersecurity critic. Are we scrabbling? The man swallowed. No, Joe. Victor jounced formally. Good. Also we quest. Nick entered the room still, his presence incontinently altering the air. Victor didn't turn, but he knew his son was there. Talk, Victor said. Nick folded his arms. I traced some of the movement. It's not arbitrary. Whoever launched this anticipated internal pushback. They erected redundancies. Victor eventually turned. Names. Nick dithered. Kane Ashby. A murmur gurgled through the room. Victoria exhaled sluggishly. I knew it. Victor's aspect hardened. And he didn't do it alone. Nick met his father's eyes. No. He didn't. At Crimson Lights, Lily Winters sat gaping into a mug of coffee that had long since gone cold. She hadn't slept. The communication from Kane, suddenly distant, final, had lodged itself in her casket like a shard of glass. I'm choosing a different future. That was each it said. Devin slid into the seat across from her again, concern etched into his face. You still haven't heard from him? Lily shook her head. No. And that's the loudest part. Devin lowered. You suppose he did commodity big? I suppose, Lily replied still, that Kane eventually stopped pretending he wanted remission. Devin leaned back. That's dangerous. Lily looked up. For who? Devin didn't answer. Billy Abbott paced the length of the living room at the Abbott manse, phone pressed to his observance. Jack heated on the other end, saying nothing, letting Billy talk himself out. They're actually doing it, Billy said. Kane and Phyllis. They're not pretending. Jack suffed. I know. Billy stopped pacing. Also, why aren't we stopping them? Because, Jack replied unevenly, Victor Newman doesn't share adversaries. Billy scarfed. That's rich coming from you. Jack's voice stoned. Hear to me. If Victor retaliates and he won't watch who differently gets hit. Billy lowered his voice. You suppose Phyllis knows what she unleashed? Jack broke. Phyllis no way does. Back on the train, Phyllis stood at the window, watching the geography blur past as Kane ended the call with one of his connections. They're containing the damage, Kane said. Victor's platoon insulated the worst of it. Phyllis turned sprucely. Containing isn't stopping. No, Kane agreed. But it means we've lost the element of surprise. Phyllis crossed her arms. You said this was watertight. It was, Kane replied. Until Victor realized the AI was conking, it was learning. Phyllis's jaw tensed. So now what?